G'day, everybody, and welcome back to the Crabtree Performance podcast. This is episode 7. It has been a while. It is now June. I last filmed episode 6 in April. It has been a very, very busy period of time, but this is a very, very special episode. I had the pleasure of recently being able to sit down and run a live Zoom coaching seminar to 60 plus individuals, and we were able to record that, and we're going to be uploading it for all of you guys today. So this covers everything in regards to building your coaching business from authentic, grounded, real work, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Proceed to give you what you need. It's not live, motherfuckers. Get live, motherfuckers.
For now, I'm going to turn my mic off, and Taylor is going to be taking the reins.
Alrighty. Well, g'day everybody. Thanks for jumping on. I'll try my best to be as personable as possible, considering there's 50 of you on here. And look, I know Cam's kind of led with a little bit of that lead acquisition type thing, and I'm just going to preface by saying that in no way, shape, or form am I a business coach. Am I by any means, a extremely knowledgeable individual in regards to business. But one thing that I am knowledgeable about is how to build your coaching business through just genuinely being a high level coach. So, for those of you who've potentially, thought about working with me previously or in the future, in all seriousness, none of what I say today should really have anything to do with yourself as an athlete. If I've talked to you as an athlete today, I've not done my job. I really want to do my best to talk to you guys in how you can help others rather than how you can help yourself. And in helping others, that will in turn help yourselves. So to start, for those of you who do know me, hello. For those of you who don't, I am Taylor. I have been a coach or working in the industry since 2015, when I was in year 11. I come from a little small town in country Victoria, so have kind of moved across to Sydney. After growing up in Adelaide, I was always involved in sports, which I think has led me to, be in the position I am now with regards to coaching, and how a lot of that kind of lends itself to the whole process. And but yeah, basically how I got to this point realistically was playing Aussie rules footy. Typical, you get injured and then you kind of trying to find a something else to put your time and your effort and your energy into. And I initially just got into the gym myself personally, just for me, as a lot of us do, and trying to fill a void that was somewhat there with regards to all of those hours that I was spending playing sports. Once I got into that, I was helping realistically for free. I was just helping my mates who wanted to do the same, whether they wanted to kind of grow for football or basketball or whatever it may be. And since then, it transitioned over the last 10, 11 years to where it is at now, where I'm working with specifically a pretty nuanced competitors. I don't really do a lot of lifestyle work anymore. Not that I don't really enjoy it, but I really chase at this point in my coaching career a lot of fulfillment. I don't necessarily chase just athlete quantity, which is something we'll talk about today. So yeah, realistically, in no way, shape, or form am I a business coach. I can't tell you how to do all the things that Cam can tell you, but what I can do is I can hopefully help you become the most personable, knowledgeable coach possible. And at the end of the day, we only have an hour. So look, as I said, if you guys, did want to reach out and ask questions, or jump on a call, we can do that at any point. You can reach Crabtree Performance through all the links, and you can reach me through Instagram. I'm on there pretty much nonstop, as a lot of us would be. So yeah, that's that. But look, what I want to talk about today is a little bit of the philosophy of myself when it comes to coaching, how I kind of go about the onboarding process, and then where I take things from there with regards to, whether we're coaching Gen Pop athletes, whether we're coaching lifestyle athletes, whether you're coaching competitors. But one thing I will start by saying is, if your goal is to simply make as much money as possible and be as financially successful as possible, becoming a nuanced prep coach or coach in any one specific area is probably shooting yourselves in the foot. I, you know, we all love money. Money's great, but I never got into this to make money. I still coach people for free. I still, do things that are purely from a fulfillment-based standpoint, and that is really where I think I've been able to be successful in simply just chasing fulfillment and working with individuals that fulfill me. And yes, when you're in the early stages of coaching, you need to kind of, have a little bit of leeway there with potentially, working with people or trying to align with people you may not necessarily do so. A lot of us have engaged in the fitness industry or health and fitness in some capacity for many years, whether it's relatively, recently or, 10, 12 years. So we don't, have, especially when it comes to Gen Pop, we don't always align, entirely with those individuals. And that's realistically where it would come from, what I would take, in an onboarding. And realistically, what I do basically to start is, when I'm onboarding somebody, I'm really trying to, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but having done this for, the better part of 10 years, you pick up these certain skills and strategies, but you're really trying to, and one area I think a lot of people, fall short, is they're trying to sell themselves. So you as a coach, your initial idea, which makes sense in reality, is you're trying to sell yourself to this individual, which you want to make sure that they understand that, you have the capabilities to do what it is they're trying to achieve. And that is, results-based business. But realistically, they've already sought you out more than likely. So they have some level of buy-in to what you are trying to promote or do. Your goal would be for them, the best thing you can do is to get them to sell themselves to you. Why do they want to work with you? What can they do for you in turn as a coach? That should be your goal. And it's not necessarily something that can just happen like that. I'm very lucky in that I started posting on social media just for myself back in 2015. And, that was back in year 11 when I had the year 12s and people, in my footy teams and stuff telling me that, I was, all sorts of names for posting on Instagram and posting shirtless pictures. And as much as, everybody does it now, in 2015, 2016, it wasn't as common practice as it is now. CBum, TikTok, social media, that all kind of took that to another level. So, what that has allowed me to do is it's allowed this portfolio over a decade of my own progression personally. And at times you can see, certain coaching aspects, and that's already selling myself to them without me having to say anything. So creating this portfolio and really kind of grounding yourself in authenticity, that's one thing that, Cam will hate me for saying this, but I am not somebody who is, super in depth with regards to the business coaching things. Like I'm very pessimistic when it comes to business coaching. And usually I wouldn't do something like this, and that I would be of the belief that, if someone was as successful as business as what they say they are, they would be running their business, not telling other people how to run theirs. But in saying that, that is why I'm here, because I believe that Cam is of both. And, this is a free seminar for us all all able to kind of develop. And even I'm developing here. I'm someone who's at the core of who I am, I'm a very big introvert. I like to have one foot in the industry and one foot out. So you won't see me kind of running around the Gold Coast or posting up little things like that. But again, it's everybody each to their own. But as I was saying, with regards to, the onboarding process and whatnot, the biggest thing that I can say is that authenticity. And that comes through not necessarily finding your niche, because you can have a lot of different areas where you feel that you can lean into. Like for me, if you went to my Instagram, my personal Instagram, not my coaching Instagram, you'd be like, this is, travel, family, a little bit of gym, and that's kind of what I like to do. I like to keep it somewhat, personable and grounded. Whereas, you have others who are specifically coaching content, coaching content, coaching content, which obviously if you're trying to promote yourselves, that makes sense, but you want to also have a level of authenticity, right? A lot of what will happen for the athletes, and it's hard to be contextually specific because some of you obviously work with a great deal of athletes already, and some of you are, really early in your journey, but allowing yourself to promote your personality as a coach is really, really important. And it doesn't have anything to do with your knowledge. It doesn't have anything to do with your skill set. It doesn't have anything to do with your how you look. It's what you make people feel. And the biggest example, which is an interesting one that I can use in regards to promoting that personality, is how many women, maybe men, I don't know, we're in 2025, buy Kylie Jenner's makeup. They buy Kylie Jenner's makeup because they fucking love Kylie Jenner. I'm sure there's plenty of makeup out there that is significantly better and significantly better price point than Kylie Jenner's makeup, but people buy into that because they're buying her. They're not buying what she's selling, albeit, yes, they are tangibly purchasing that item, but they're supporting her. They're supporting that personality. They're supporting that person that they think they know. And if people have more access to you, if people have more understanding of who you are, your personality, your personability, that allows them to feel as if they are a part of you to a certain extent. And that's where relationships really come into that. And that can be, you can stimulate that relationship the moment you have a consult call. And if you guys aren't doing consult calls where you are either calling them on the phone or visually, like visually is what like we are right now, it's much different because you can see my emotion, you can see me moving my hands, you can see how I'm talking, you can see me, and you can attach this voice to a personality and a person. Whereas when it's on the phone, it's obviously still somewhat personable, but it's not as much. And that immediately creates, especially if you are doing those consult calls, that immediately creates that level of professionalism, but it also creates that level of safety in which, again, depending on who you're coaching, you want to be able to make this person, especially if it's lifestyle, gen pop, you want to be able to make this person feel safe. So again, realistically, creating that emotional safety and competence perception is really important because you want your client or athlete or whoever it may be to feel emotionally secure and guided. And essentially the tone of that consult, without saying that specifically, is you are safe here and I know what I'm doing and I know how to get you to this intended goal or this intended outcome, whether it be, someone who's 120 kilos and they want to get to 90, whether it's a male or a female who's just saying, I want to look better for my partner, whether it's someone who says, I want to be the next Mr. fucking Olympia, whatever it is, like if you can tell them, if you can make them feel without saying that you have the ability to get them there and they are safe to tell you these things, then that immediately establishes that relationship. And relationship building is the foundation of everything you guys should be doing. And I'm sure, as I said, I'm sure I'm saying a lot of things that you already know, but the more you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable and having those conversations, and for some of you being, who are extroverts and whatnot, who are really good at talking to people and really good at getting out there, it may come really naturally, especially if you do align with that person. But, if you're a male that's 120 kilos and you're a bodybuilder, you're not necessarily going to align with the bikini competitor that's just come from netball and is trying to transition into being a, competitive bikini athlete. You need to find common ground, and, doing that through just conversation and talking is really important, but also like really being able to be exceptional at assessing the type of personality that someone has the moment they start talking to you on a call. I'm sure that many of you have done calls before where you have somebody who is extremely talkative. You can say one little trigger sentence and they'll tell you something for the next 25 minutes. And, that's where that's leading. And then you'll have someone who you really have to grind every little bit of information out. And even though they've sought you out, they are shy, they are introverted, and that is their personality. And if you can make that assessment, of potentially a validation seeker, so they may need reassurance to, combat certain strategies, or potentially someone who's a data dumper and they, attempt to prove themselves through oversharing, and they can often be relatively insecure in that. Someone who may be potentially a little bit disassociated, so they have like detached language or inconsistent answers, or They're usually, emotionally disengaged due to past failures within the industry, and they're almost reaching out in a way that's like, I'm just going to see how it goes. I don't need you specifically, but realistically, at the core of it, they're wanting you to, again, make them feel safe, make them feel grounded. And then you have those kind of like, you know, I wouldn't say, I don't know what else to call it, but I would say like pretenders, whereby there are a lot of people within this industry who talk about it, put all their effort into trying to portray a certain image rather than putting the effort into becoming that. And then people would represent them that way in and of itself anyway. So assessing these kind of, different personality types is really, really important. And that allows you to construct the way in which you talk to somebody, the way in which you engage with somebody. Even today, I was doing, before we did this call, I had check-ins to do. And Thursdays are my quiet days, thank God. So I didn't have too many to do. But there was a conversation that I had with one female athlete, and there was essentially the exact same conversation I had with another. But the way in which I framed those different conversations is purely around how in which they deal with criticism or critique or regression or progression. On one hand, I can tell one bikini competitor that she needs to do X. She's underperforming here. The standards that I'm holding her to are not being met, and she adapts to that. That really challenges her in a way that she really likes. And I know that because I know that's her personality, and that's come through conversation, that's come through relationship, and that's come through the ability to coach this person for years. And then on the other hand, I have another individual, very similar implementations at the current time, very similar timeline with regards to periodization, where I have to tell her that everything is okay and this is why this is happening. And, to understand that, look, we can do a little bit better here. And I would really challenge her to try and achieve this week. But if the context of the week doesn't necessarily allow her to achieve that, that's okay, because we have an extended timeline that isn't set in stone. And that allows her to feel, you know, somewhat progressive, and allows her to perform at her best. So you cannot both onboard everybody the same way. You can't sit there and have this pre-question ready to answer, because ready to ask, because the answers are going to be different, the personality is going to be different. And the moment you don't lean into what that person is providing, or what that person is, representing or speaking to you, both verbally or just emotionally, the moment you'll lose them. And again, that just comes through being personable over time, really listening. Like, you should be, again, numbers, numerical, whatever it may be, but you should spend majority of that call listening, letting them, don't try and sell yourself, let them like promote questions, promote, certain little trigger points for them to talk on, and then let themselves sell you, let them sell themselves to you, and you can buy into them as opposed to them buying into you because they've already done that. So that's kind of how I would structure onboarding and introduction and assessing personality. And again, there's so much nuance to these types of things. That's where, jumping on a call with 50 plus people is a little bit challenging, because it's not necessarily representative of everybody's experience. But I think there's some level of application that we can all take in regards to, like, the foundation of what you guys are doing should come through authenticity. So again, being your authentic self and not representing something that you're not, because people will see that over time. It also really can damage you emotionally if you're trying to portray yourself to be a certain way, but in turn you're not that. Even if, I've had consults with athletes in the past and consults with coaches in the past where I've genuinely told them to go out and say they don't have any clients. They don't have any clients. They're wanting to work with some, rather than the complete opposite you hear all the time of athletes and coaches jumping on and saying, I've got 15 clients and, I've got 2 spots left, or whatever it may be. And I'm doing all this turnover and trying to promote as if they're this, people can see through that. Whereas if you have the authenticity to go on and say, I'm wanting to work with people, whether it's for free, whether it's not, I guarantee you guys, if you do free work, if you do work that is, fulfilling to you and really beneficial to others, when you create that buy-in, you create that relationship, the most challenging thing will be getting them to not want to pay. I guarantee it, because there was a time in which 2016, 2017, 2018, I was scrounging away trying to get people to pay $30 for a week for coaching. And now I charge X, whatever it may be. We won't go into details, but people pay that without even me. It's almost imposter syndrome for me because the results, the portfolio, the authenticity, the community, it's all organically grown over that period of time. But because I've done that work initially, and that's where, it's really important just to be someone who is extremely personable, promote your personality, whether it's, as something as simple as showing your partner and showing how you engage. Like, who I'm sure many people here know Coben and Hattie, who are two close friends of mine. And people buy into their relationship that don't even know them. And that's purely because that is showing their personality, that's showing authenticity. And yes, it's not everything. Instagram and social media is seeing what you want people to see. But again, it is creating buy-in, it is creating attachment that people can make to you. If people don't know anything about who you are, where you come from, what you represent, the way in which you communicate, the way in which you act, they're not going to buy in, regardless of you could be the most knowledgeable or knowledgeable person there is or coach there is. So that's really, really important. As I said, realistically, once you do have those athletes somewhat onboarded and introduced to the system, again, continuing to develop your ability to understand what their behaviors are like, what their personality type is. I've broken it down and I have a few dot points in regards to, four coachable archetypes that I feel like I deal with a lot with regards to both when I was working with lifestyle clients, competitors, versus more so just strictly competitors now. But you essentially have the driver, right? So you have all of us will have had an athlete that is outcome obsessed. They respond really well in high pressure, high responsibility, and they want to dominate everything. They're that individual who may not necessarily be anywhere near the level, but I want to be the Mr. Olympia. I want to be the next C bum. They're the driver. So that requires you to then have precision, structure, challenge them. They respond really well to short-term targets and competitive framing. And that doesn't mean they have to be a competitive athlete. What that means is you are challenging them, even in regards to general population coaching, in a competitive nature. So you're saying to them, all right, last week we had X amount of kilograms on this specific exercise. This week I want you to try and achieve X. And in the grand scheme of things, that tiny little escalation of mechanical tension and progression of volume isn't going to make a big difference. But to them, the psychology of that, if you just said, oh, you'll progress likely this week and we'll see how you go, it's again not coaching that person to that specific outcome, that specific personality. And you then would have what I would determine to be like analyst, which would be, kind of they're relatively cautious of, things you're implementing. We've all had that person, you've implemented this and they've gone, why would we do that? Like, what is there something else we can do? Or, can you explain in depth? And you obviously want to explain everything possible, but you do have those people that are relatively cautious and they're very data hungry. So they're very attached to numerical data, like biofeedback, scale weight. They're somewhat skeptical of themselves, not necessarily you, but skeptical of themselves and their ability to, you know, do what it is in which they need to do. And, they really want to know the why. So in that instance, it requires you to be extremely informative, extremely consistent with regards to your logic, and you want to coach with detailed breakdowns, rationale for every single bit of periodization, rationale for every single method, and be proactive with regards to your information. So you telling them things before they've asked those questions, again, just further creates that relationship and further creates that ability for you or them to feel as if you know them. The more an athlete that you work with feels that you know them like they are your best friend, I guarantee you that the better the relationship is going to be, the more transparent they're going to be, the more honest they're going to be, the more open they're going to be, and that allows you all context to work within. Then you've got an empath. So they value connection, they value affirmation, they value that emotional safety. And that's what I described with that female athlete, the latter one that I worked with before. You have to be softly spoken. It doesn't have to be a female, very often males as well. But the coaching must feel like a partnership. They want to feel as if there is a certain level of relationship building, and that's kind of where you have those athletes that, they really, they send you the memes and they send you the certain things that they reply to your stories all the time. And again, you may not align with them whatsoever in regards to a non-coaching specific context, but it is your job to make them feel warranted, to make them feel worthwhile, to make that relationship as personable as you can, while still having those professional boundaries that are allowing you to do your job and your role. And that's a really challenging thing to do when you are someone who cares as deeply as what a lot of us do with regards to client progression, client performance, keeping a fine line between, having that relationship that is really deeply connected, but also having that ability to still tell them, you need to change this, you need to do this now, so that they still have you on that pedestal whereby they value your word and they value what you're essentially expressing to them. Then, with regards to the final one, which we have all at some point, I'm sure, dealt with in a large or minor capacity, is the rebel. So they are resistant to authority. They are driven purely by autonomy. They're creative, they're energetic, but they really avoid structure. So that might be the 19-year-old that has looked up to Ronnie Coleman since he was 15 and has posters of Arnold on his wall, and jumps in and he sees all this collective data, this biofeedback, this reasoning, this method-driven, implementations, and they go, fuck all that. I don't need that. I just need you to tell me what I'm taking PD wise, how hard I need to train, when I don't need to train that hard, and they walk into the gym with a stringer and whatever. And again, like I'm stereotyping, but it is again a completely different personality, and you need to be able to engage with those. And then there's all of us that have our own personality. So the more you can mold yourself, at least expressively and verbally, into being able to be someone who represents all of those things, whereby I would more so, for me, if I was my coach coaching myself, I would associate myself with someone who's more so an analyst and a driver. Whereas you need to essentially think about, what would you hire yourself for the goals in which you're trying to achieve? If you would hire yourself for the goals in which you are trying to achieve, then you're doing something right. If you wouldn't, not to say that we don't all have, coaches that, take the reins and everything for us, but if you truly believe that you weren't able to assess those personality types, weren't able to formulate that level of personability, weren't able to, be that coach that you would need at the point in which you are right now, then you can't expect others to do the same. It's people will, but they just won't have that long ticket value where they won't stay for a long period of time, because you will have that, kind of disconnect with regards to, the communication, the understanding and whatnot. And, you know, realistically, it sounds harsh, but some of us have a really good ability, whether it's repetition over time to talk, to communicate, to be personable, and others need to put as much effort into their knowledge, their acquisition of data, their study readings, their learnings as they do with regards to, the communication side of things. Because you could know every single thing there is to know. If you cannot communicate that, not only if you can't communicate that at face value, but if you can't communicate that to their own personality or to that different type of personality, then you have a disconnect. And that's where over time that relationship breaks down, and they either won't seek you out or they will leave to go to another coach or another environment or whatever that may be. So that is really, really important, in regards to being able to create that buy-in. So also, for everyone else, I'm on 150 grams of carbs right now. So if I have to run to the bathroom quickly, I apologize. It's been hectic. But that kind of takes us to that next point of call, which is where you obviously have that ability to start working with that individual, right? So you've had the consultation, you've had the initial communication, and now we're looking at, obviously you've collected data. You want to be, depending on the individual, more often than not, I would say it's really important, even if they are a Gen Pop client or a lifestyle client, to collect blood work to make sure there's no maladaptive state going on or anything like that. And not only collecting that blood work, but be really important that you know what to assess within that blood work. And there's probably no point in getting again, it's not going to hurt to get a lifestyle client that's potentially never trained before and never really, been in any sort of high intensity environment, to go get a full blood panel. But by all means, if you wanted to do that, you know how to assess that and utilize that data to then, help them progress forward. That's beneficial as well. But you want to have some sort of baseline assessment. So getting bloods, getting visuals, understanding their personality, and then implementing these strategies moving forward. So for me personally, regardless of whether it was between 2016 and 2021 or 2021 versus 2025, where I've begun and now, in pretty much a full-time capacity working with specifically competitors, you want to periodize. I know that everybody, as I said, just has that different type of personality, and some people can be overwhelmed with really long-term periodization. And that doesn't mean that you have to create or reverse engineer periodization to last 36, 52, 64. There's some athletes I work with that we have periodized 104, 125, 135 weeks away from where we are right now. There's others that are competitors and both non-competitors that are within 6 to 12 to 18 week blocks. So again, tailoring that to the individual, coaching the personality, coaching the person, even with regards to periodization is really important. And that may not necessarily be how you work, but it's how they work. And what's more important is how they work, not how you best work. You need to construct and configure your own personality, your own systems to best represent how they will achieve the best results. And yes, there needs to be some buy-in to this, to what you're offering. And if you work that way, but by all means, if it's, say it's periodization and somebody gets overwhelmed by, the structure of the next 102, 104, 2 years worth of work being periodized for them, you can create that and then just hide it. Just block it out and they can't see that. But at least you know where you want them to go, and they're able to see what you want them to see based on your identification of their personality types and how they best work. What I like to do is I like to assess the goal. So it could be, I want to lose 10 kilos in the next 20 weeks. That's, relatively broad and not specific. And then you have, I want to compete in the Career Pro in Season C 2026, and that is 63 weeks away or whatever it may be. So instead of periodizing forward, I periodize backwards. I reverse engineer that periodization. So we pick that target date relative to if it is just simply fat loss with a lifestyle client, or whether it is a specific competitive goal or aspiration, or whether it's fucking CrossFit or high rocks, whatever it may be, whatever the space is, having really clear, concise periodization. If you need to color code that to make yourself feel better or make them feel better, color code the damn thing. Do whatever it needs to be done to make them feel as comfortable as possible, but have that periodization scheme. So, athletes that I work with that are both on this call right now, they can all tell you that if they went in, there would be some conversation, some level of representation around where they have been and where they are going, and creating that trajectory of engineering over a long period of time. And that doesn't mean that that's set in stone. Like, you always want to preface, there is, again, specific to the individual. If I was to tell that female that I coached and was updating prior to this call that everything needs to be this way for the next 54 weeks or it's a failure, the level of pressure, the level of guilt, the level of dissatisfaction that she would feel as a result of that would be overwhelming to the point she just wouldn't perform to the capacity we need. Then you have the vice versa. I have someone who demands that level of periodization. They want every single area of their day to be represented by something that they are contributing to bodybuilding or physique development or their own progression. And that's just, again, a difference of personality. And, that is what makes coaching so exciting. You work with so many different personalities and you have the opportunity to fill so many different, goals for people, or at least assist them in that. And again, working in different capacities and kind of working in different patterns is really important. But I think that really the periodization is such a key in being able to structure. Even as a coach, it's super beneficial. How many times as a coach, especially if you're working with a large portion of people, you'll jump on there and you go, what did I say last week? Like, I can see the biofeedback, I can see the visuals, I know roughly where we're going, but what was the specificity of last week? Obviously, you can watch back what you said to them, you can read back what you said to them, but really allowing yourself to be guided by that periodization that you've constructed based on your initial assessments, and then manipulating that as they go. What I really like to do is we'll reverse engineer, say it's a competition prep. We'll reverse engineer from, again, depending on if it's someone who's competing for the first time, you're going to want to have, at least more time than not enough. So let's say it's a 26-week timeline with regards to a preparation phase, and they've got 63 weeks total. We then have, let's say we've worked all the way back to 26 weeks. Between 26 and 22, you might have a maintenance phase. Now, some people realistically despise a maintenance phase. And the reason I like to implement those, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's 4 weeks, is so that individual can exist as a human being, not a bodybuilder, not a physique athlete, not anything to do with health and fitness prior to the commencement of a preparation phase, which is going to take a significant amount of sacrifice, a significant amount of diligency, a significant amount of time, effort, fatigue. And by the end of that, if you've taken someone through the last 63 weeks and they haven't had any period of time in which they can spend reducing fatigue, existing as a human being with regards to that psychology, they will be burnt out by the time they get on stage. It may not translate in the physique, but then it translates to their need to stop doing what it is in which they do once they finish. So you would have an athlete that would be absolutely despising training, despising the gym, despising the whole, they may still execute as you should, but then 2 weeks after the prep's finished, oh, I'm going to pause things, I'm going to leave, I'm going to take some time because they are burnt out via the last 63 weeks of their periodization being purely potentiated by the development of them as an athlete. So giving just a 2 to 4 week period of time where they're able to really, it's not even from a fatigue management standpoint, more so like you could get someone ready to prep from a fatigue accumulation standpoint in the space of a week if you really had to. If you really, especially if they already had those previous implementations done at a high level, which as a competitor they should. But being able to, even if they you say to them, look, we're going to have intuitive consumption. So the week prior to prep, I don't want you to go and eat a bunch of shit. I don't want you to do that, but I want you to eat to appetite. I want you to have intuitive consumption. I want you to go and have that free meal with your mum at the cafe. I want you to go and spend some time with your misso in the fucking hot tub and eat a fucking, have a hot chocolate or whatever it may be. Just like existing as a human being prior to the commencement of something that is done that very few people can do. And again, I'm prefacing obviously a competition prep. This can be applied downstream to lifestyle, to Gen Pop, whether it is them going to do a marathon, whether it is them going to play tennis or their golf tournament, whatever it may be, whatever space in which you're working with, creating structure, creating that periodization really is assistive. Once we're reversing out of that maintenance phase, so we're going backwards, right? You essentially have a growth phase. If their goal is to grow, again, nuance relative to the athlete, you might work with a classic physique athlete where realistically you're having to refine the tissue in which they already have because the weight cap is constrictive to how big they can get. So realistically, instead of a growth phase, it's more a refinement. You're trying to take tissue from one area, put it into another that can just elevate that classic physique frame or whatever it may be. But you're obviously having some specific phase pertaining to a prep where you've been growing. You then, prior to that, you might have prior to the first initial growth phase, you may have a little bit of resensitization, whereby if you're going to have somebody exist within a period of, accumulative fatigue, just as accumulative fatigue would ensue over that 26 weeks of prep, a lot of coaches don't associate the level of fatigue that comes through the accumulation of food in the reverse. It is just as fatiguing, if not more, for someone to be consuming more food, more training, more load, more drugs over an extended period of time, just as in prep. So removing that dietary stress, removing that dietary fatigue with little resensitizations or mini cuts or RFLs throughout a growth phase is really important and also keeps them within striking distance of the composition you need them to be in for stage. The more, especially with a first-time competitor, the easier you can make it for them to achieve the condition in which they need, the better it will be for you, the better it will be for them, the more applicable it will be for them to actually complete the prep. Because obviously you want to have them represent your business as much as you possibly can at the highest regard, but you want them to be able to complete what it is in which they're doing. And that is just as important. That's what a lot of people forget. They think that everybody just has the capacity, regardless of personality type, to just continue to be working within this extremely high intensity environment. And some people do not have that ability because they have not had the ability to engage in those times where things are being resensitized or the psychology in which they're existing in is not pertaining to prep. They're pertaining to them as a human being. They're engaging in those societal outcomes and environments that are really important, for the longevity of bodybuilding. When we're talking athletes, we're talking competitors, you want to work with an individual for the longest period of time you can until they reach the end goal. And that end goal may be, you may start working with them at 25 years old and they may cease to compete in bodybuilding at 32. They may still want you to work with them in a capacity transitioning out of that, but you want to be able to work with this person for as long as possible. And nobody, no matter how dedicated you are, whether it is psychologically or physiologically, can exist in this level of stress, fatigue, and accumulative allostatic load for years and years and years at end. They may feel like they can, but they will burn out and they will go and do something else, even if they don't feel like they've burnt out. it will happen organically. It'll happen naturally. So allowing your athletes, allowing your clients to exist in an environment where there's empathy, there's understanding that, we can't all just be going 100% full tilt all the time. And through this period of time where you're working on growing the physique, you want to be working on growing the mind as well, right? So a lot of these individuals that you work with come from backgrounds where, they may have come from some insecurity, some anxiety. They may come from a high performance environment where that isn't the case. But regardless of, there is always things you can do to elevate, the foundational habits and behaviors they need to ensure to make sure that their expectations going into prep are tempered. And the best thing you can have for your athletes prior to the commencement of prep is their foundation, their environment, making sure their routine, their structure, their performance is all grounded and you can standardize that. If someone is to start a prep with very little momentum, they've been progressing one week and then the next week their habits fall to the wayside. When they go into that prep, they may be telling you that, yes, I'm going to be able to achieve X, Y, and Z. But as they get deeper and deeper into that, the thoughts of self-doubt, the thoughts of worry, the subjective nature of how they feel really begins to impact their look. There's been so many times where you work with an athlete and you can see visually, whether it is Gen Pop or whether it is, a physique-based athlete, that they look better and better as a result of the work in which you guys are doing together. But they may have had a terrible week. If it's a competitor, they may have not seen the scale move as much as they like to. Or if it's a Gen Pop or lifestyle athlete, their boss at work may have been up their fucking ass and they've been really annoying and it's impacted how they feel. And people psychologically will assess how they feel with how they look. So I guarantee you, even myself, I do it as well. If you are having a traumatic week, if you're having a terrible week, and you go and look at yourself in the mirror, I guarantee you are going to judge yourself more harshly visually on what it is emotionally you're dealing with at the time. Versus if you looked exactly the same, you're the same weight, you've engaged in the same actions all week, but you've had a much better week. Things are going well in business, things are going well in life, relationships are healthy, performance is good. You will look at yourself in a different light. And that is heightened with athletes that you work with, whether it is lifestyle, whether it is Gen Pop, whether it is preparation, because they are in that heightened stress environment and they're trying to stay accountable to you. We've worked, a lot of us would have worked with coaches before. You want to do well by them. You want to make them proud. You want to, achieve what they have intended you to achieve. And sometimes things don't necessarily pan out that way because of the context in which you're existing in from a day-to-day standpoint. But it is imperative that you build those foundational behaviors, that structure, that routine. And again, as much as I'm prefacing a competitor here, this is, if not more important, with regards to Gen Pop. And, I don't work with a lot of Gen Pop athletes these days, but the best thing that you can do for yourself as a coach to allow yourself to engage in as much fulfillment as possible, because I'm sure a lot of you on the call would love to jump on and just start working with ex-athlete and have the opportunity to put this person on stage and that person on stage or whatever it may be with regards to, the progression of your business, whether it's financial, whether it's fulfillment, is to understand that if you are working with lifestyle or Gen Pop or even it transitions into performance-based athletes, sometimes getting 50% out of somebody, that is their max capacity. And if you've taken them from 0 to 50, you have done your job. If 50% adherence and progression and consistency is all somebody has to give, and if they weren't in your guidance or weren't in somebody else's guidance, weren't going to give any at all, you've done your job. 0 to 50, that is a huge escalation of adherence. That is a huge escalation of consistency. That is at least half their week that you've been able to transform. But some people, regardless of how much you communicate, how much you build those relationships, they just do not have the capacity nor desire, nor do they have the priority in essentially what we are doing to escalate to that 100%. And if you're constantly trying to pull someone to a position, whether it's a Gen Pop or preparation athlete, that they just do not want to be in, you'll create a disconnect. So you really need to, again, it'll help you guys tremendously, because one thing I dealt with when I was working through, years and years and years of Gen Pop is I was having this association to, I knew I wanted to coach athletes. I knew I wanted to coach high performance individuals. And sometimes I would place those standards on people who just weren't going to work within that standard itself. So you need to place those standards on someone and you need to assess what they, again, can do. And if anything, with regards to the way in which you coach them, under promising and over delivering. If they over deliver, by all means, that's the best thing that can happen. Realistically, try to allow yourself to take comfort and take satisfaction and take fulfillment in taking an athlete from zero, or taking a lifestyle client from 0% adherence, binge and restrict models, and doing everything wrong to 50%. But by all means, you want them to be at 100%. You want them to engage in this way in which they are existing within the industry at the level in which you would. But that sometimes isn't what people have the capacity to do. And prefacing that with a competitor, bodybuilding is extremely, extremely nuanced with regards to genetics. Everybody wants to be Chris Bumstead. Everybody wants to be Mrs. Bikini Olympia, Miss Wellness Olympia. Genetically, there's a reason why there's only been 14, 15 Mr. Olympias in the opens, and there's also a reason why there's been one dude for the last 5 years, 6 years that has won, because it is entirely genetically predisposition. And then thus on top of that, you can help somebody go from X to Z by elevating their potential. But their potential may only be the third call out and fifth place in the third call out of an amateur show. But if you've taken them from never going to achieve anywhere near that, someone who doesn't look like they've ever trained before, someone who doesn't look like they've engaged in any sort of bodybuilding, they don't have the genetic capacity to even achieve those types of things, and you get them to that level, by all means, it's not as glamorous, it's not as successful as it seems with regards to someone placing first place in a show, or winning a pro show, or winning a pro card. But you have done your job, and that is where a lot of people, athletes especially, have a disconnect with regards to what great coaching is. There are so many coaches in this industry, from a lifestyle perspective, from a general population standpoint, and especially competitive, that they have these athletes that they haven't really developed. They've taken an athlete that was already very well developed, and they've just tweaked a few things, nuanced a few things. They're genetically predispositioned very well, and then they have competitive success. And whether it's a female, whether it's a male, they then look at that coach and they go, wow, look at the level of athlete this person is. They must have developed them from X to Z, and they see that competitive reward and they see that response. Whereby, if you want to assess how great a coach is, look at their look at the performers that are not placing first, second, third, fourth. Look at where they've come from and look at where they've gone. A great coach can take someone from not even looking like they should be anywhere near the level to achieving their absolute potential within that competitive timeline. And as I said, there are many, many coaches who hide behind that guise in the industry of, yep, they've built up this communication system, they've got the hype around them, but realistically, they're just taking someone from X to Z. They've tweaked a few things with regards to pharmacology or whatnot. And now there's this influx of athletes, and this community is created that's organic, and it really fosters into further and further business. But if you can assess your progression, your success on where you've started with somebody versus where they're going, and disassociate just the results that you're getting for them, I guarantee you over a longer period of time, you'll create that portfolio we were speaking about before, and you'll be able to develop that athlete to be, and develop that your business to be, word of mouth based. Like realistically, I know that we're in a year 2025 where there is so much reinforcement with regards to self promotion, and as I said, you want to put yourself out there in an authentic way. You want to create content that is true to yourself, and that will be really beneficial in the long term. But realistically, allowing yourself to create that portfolio, create that personality, and reinforce those foundational behaviors of who you are is extremely important. And then just like understanding that if you continue to, in a specific environment, continue to like promote yourself with a lack of what's the word I'm looking for? Authenticity, it will shine through. And as I was saying, I have, in the entire Crabtree Performance 10 years I've been working, I've done one sponsored post. It generated me zero fucking leads. I should have hit up Cam, and it did absolutely nothing. But I've been able to build my business to a point where I'm working with competitive athletes every single day, full time, through word of mouth. And I guarantee you, at the end of the day, no matter everything that I've spoken about across this timeline, results are what is the most important. People are paying you to achieve an intended outcome. They are not paying you to tell them how many mental wins they had today, or be their best friend. And yes, this is kind of counterintuitive to what I was saying before with creating those relationships, but you need to combine both. You need to create these relationships. You need to have this level of, rapport with your athletes and community. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the skill set to take that knowledge or take that individual and apply that knowledge and get them results, they will leave. They can be your best friend in the world, but again, they will leave. You'll still have that friendship, but they will not be with you. So, as much as you want to do social media posts, as much as you want to do X, Y, and Z, seek to be obsessed with learning more about what it is you need to learn more of. And that is purely coming down to who it is in which you're working with. If you're working with a bunch of athletes that are demanding a certain level of knowledge from you from a lifestyle standpoint or a mental framework standpoint or developing habits, then go and learn everything you can about habit psychology, about the formation of those behaviors, and put your absolute every waking moment into that. And then on the side, do things where you feel as if you want to trend in the future. But if you're putting all of your time, effort, and consistency into something that you're not going to utilize, at least in the moment, you're sacrificing the business progression that you can have in the moment because it won't just be, as I said, I've been doing this, and again, like complete honesty, there is, with no matter everything I've said to you guys today, there is so much luck involved, timing involved in all of this. I was very lucky to work with one athlete that then led to another athlete that then led to another athlete. And all it takes is one. By all means, all it takes is one. But sometimes it can take 6, 7, 8 years for that one to come. And all of that time, you may feel as if there's periods of times where you're not cut out for it, or things are really frustrating and you're having to not dedicate as much time, or you're not at the position in which you wanted to be with relative to business yet. But if you can just continue to put your effort into seeking knowledge, promoting authenticity, and getting results, you will get the chance to work with that one or two individual that then spirals into that next individual. And that doesn't mean it has to be competitive. That can be a significant amount about lifestyle athletes and a significant amount of Gen Pop athletes or high rocks or CrossFit. And then you nuance yourself based on that. Realistically, it really depends on what you want as a coach. If you are here trying to, you know, genuinely have care and passion for developing people, it is of my belief, it may not be everybody's, but it is of my belief that the financial side of things will take care of itself. Unless you are just trying to be, Jeff Bezos. None of us are going to be billionaires working in the coaching industry. It's just the way it's going to be, unless you were to diversify by a million times and probably sell yourself out a million different ways. But if you truly want to have financial freedom, financial success, focus less on the immediate financial freedom and financial success and focus on just getting those results, being the most personable person you can have, being as, you know, approachable and authentic as you can be. And that's, really, really what I would say is driven that. But again, like as I said, there's a lot of luck involved, there's a lot of timing. And if you just continue to work, behind the scenes at doing things that are really important to whoever is your coaching at the moment, it's going to progress really well. And I'm trying to I'm trying to get through the dot points I have, but I can talk for apparently a long time. So I'm not sure how much we can go. Cam, how much overtime can we go? I know everyone's got a fucking day to have and things to do.
Most of these guys are online coaches, man. You should be fine. Run your thing. It's all recorded anyway, so you'll be okay.
I'll try not to bore you guys to death. Everybody, thumbs up if everyone's having a good time so far. All right, sweet. Thank you. If everyone's a thumbs down, I just literally shut the screen down. Um, so look, it's challenging because I'm trying to obviously I don't do this a lot. I am introverted and I'm trying to cover a large sample size in a relatively nuanced context. Because it can be easy to jump on here and say, oh yeah, just promote yourself and throw up these bunch of reels and stuff like that and tell people that you've only got 3 spots, and that might work for a certain period of time, but it'll turn to fluff really, really quickly. So right, we're at that periodization where you've periodized that period of time that individual is trying to achieve the intended goal. And if they don't have an intended goal, create one yourself. Create one for them yourself, whether or not they know it or not. For me specifically, what I want to then do is I realistically want to have an assessment of that baseline data that we've had. So, understanding decision-making models, reinforcing different sort of pathways and go, framing emotional strategies and languages, and then essentially getting into the kind of nitty and gritty with regards to training, PEDs, blood work. I apologize for those of you who aren't working within that space too much at the time, but at some stage you will have to assess someone's blood work. You will have to assess someone's training, obviously. And people will reach out to you, whether I've consulted with a lot of females who are like, oh, I know you want to, go across this blood work, but I not really have a lot of women that reach out to me about PEDs. I guarantee if you're a female and you look good, someone's going to ask you about Anavar. Someone's going to ask you about Clen. Someone's going to ask you about something and tell you, how did you get that physique without any of this? Or how did you get that with this? And understanding what it is you're looking at is really important. But what we essentially want to do is, with regards to training, if you can assess that training isn't just physical stimulus, it is a reflection of physiological and psychological readiness. So essentially, using performance at the start of that periodization, I have five, depending on how many workouts they have, I will have 5 weeks of performance review from the get-go. So that is picking one workout per week. And, you have coaches that, oh, will go through every workout. But if you're spending, their entire update for their week going through each and every workout, you're probably going to skip through that relatively quickly. And you want to be as verbalize as much as you need to in that space of time. So essentially using their performance as a metric to assess, rest times, perceived effort, session adherence, tracking those stress adaptations, the fatigue accumulation in which they have both physiologically and psychologically, which is really important. Being able to dissociate, again, with regards to personality types, a lot of individuals that you work with will be, you might think that the capacity in which they're working isn't very stressful. There isn't a lot of high intensity, but they may tell you, oh my God, that was the hardest workout I've ever done. The fatigue is massive. This is really challenging. You can then make that assessment that, okay, maybe this individual hasn't had a lot of this technical proficiency and this exposure to the stimulus they need to train at a level and develop at the level in which they need. And it's then your obligation to correct, whether it's form, tempo, execution, train relative proximity to failure, and really explain as to why these things are important. So being able to assess and break down, the visuals of what it is in which they're going through with regards to their training is really important. Then it's on the onus is on them to actually set their fucking camera up in a way you can actually assess the movement in which they're doing. Because 9 times out of 10, they'll put their phone on a shaker on the ground, and you won't be able to see anything. So making it, as professional as, imagine you go into a high sporting environment, whether you follow Aussie rules football or whether you follow basketball or rugby. Imagine you are assessing their performance. You want to be being able to break down eccentric, concentric, length, and partial, all of these different metrics of movement. You want to be able to assess at the utmost degree. And again, all this sounds extremely nuanced, but it is creating that buy-in, is creating that understanding that you are being able to make these manipulations. And by all means, even high level athletes in which I work with, there is usually 9 times out of 10 some area that they can improve with regards to, viewing training performance. And that's something that a lot of coaches that I've consulted with one-on-one in the past, I've found don't do very well. And, it's like, oh, the nutrition is great. The PEDs are great. We have a really good relationship. I'm sure they're training okay, because for whatever reason, the industry associates the training to be a little bit of less importance, whereas, or at least in regards to gen pop and lifestyle. But if you can develop these athletes, whether it is that mum of two who is just trying to lose, a little bit of weight and look better for herself and for a husband, if you can teach them how to train effectively, you will be saving yourself so much time because they will progress. They will progress as a result of the stimulus they're exposing themselves to. And over time, they're going to visualize that. They're going to see that in front of them and you're doing your job, and they will associate that way. So understanding that. And then with regards to blood work, again, there'd be many people who would say that it's not necessary all the time if you're not working within a specific competitor. And very often, obviously, if you're getting blood work done for an athlete or a lifestyle competitor that, say it is that mum of two, they don't really necessarily know how to go and get privately tested blood work at a clinical labs or a pathological center. It's realistically onus on you is to explain as to why it is you want to have that done. So you can assess, okay, what can we leverage with regards to thyroid? What can we leverage with regards to your hormonal health? How is menstrual health, not just in females, but also with regards to males? How is your testosterone? Where is your, how bioavailable is free testosterone? Where is estrogen sitting in relation to, the amount of body fat you have on? And being able to, you might have an athlete that you work with that is extremely overweight, and then you get their blood work done, and it's completely counterproductive to what you've seen in another overweight individual. And being able to assess that, okay, despite this person's potential limits with regards to their visual and performance, there in regards to their blood work, there's a really good representation here, and you're able to associate that to them individualistically and able to work from there. But like when I am again talking within periodization, when I'm bringing an athlete on board, if it's a younger guy, I guarantee it, a lot of you would have dealt with it before. All right, what are we running? When are we running it? How much are we running? If it's a female, how much anavar are we doing? Or when can I get on PEDs? And when can I take this? And you have an obligation, if you have any sort of moral or ethical code, to understand that what the work you are doing right now, especially within pharmacology, has the ability, especially within females, males, yes, but especially within females, to affect this person for the rest of their life. One cycle, again, it sounds extremely cliche, it sounds extremely complicatory, but one cycle can impact this person, whether it's psychologically or physiologically, for the rest of their life. So you need to have that weight on your shoulders, knowing that I need to know everything I can possibly know about the context for this individual before I even engage in any of these strategies. And before you even engage in any of those strategies, there are so many specific ways you can transition someone from natural to enhanced without exposing them to, impactful or somewhat harmful stimulus like, supraphysiological ranges of hormones. So realistically, let's say I'm working within a context of a natural male, and I've had a natural athlete come on board. They've competed before. We've got their bloods done. Say you look at their bloods and their total testosterone is, relatively mid-range relative to physiological, and they're thinking, all right, sweet, can't wait for 500 milligrams of testosterone, and we're going to put my total test at 75. I'm going to have my free test at 2000 plus, and everything's going to be handy dandy, and we're going to be great, and we're going to be fantastic. The amount of progression that you can leverage from elevating someone from the mid-range of physiological testosterone to the top end of physiological, and I've had athletes on this very call that I've done that with, that is doubling even without getting out of that physiological reference range. So they're still natural, quote unquote. That is doubling their level of hormone that they had previously. And that means, all right, instead of the implementation of 500 milligrams of testosterone, for whatever reason, 250, 500 milligrams is kind of what, the relatively uneducated associates with starting dose for cycle, which is outrageous. But with regards to that, like, let's say, all right, I've got an individual that I've put on 50 milligrams twice per week. So they're utilizing 100 milligrams, or it's 25 milligrams across the week 4 times. So it's 100 milligrams. That 100 milligrams for one individual may shift their blood work from 50 total testosterone to, or may shift it from, let's say, within physiological range. Let's say it may shift it from 10 to 22. And let's say that 22 is roughly top end of physiological reference range. That is more than double what they previously were sitting at. The level of progression that you can enact and take for that individual is massive. However, you may work with another athlete who's essentially their receptiveness or androgen receptor ability to that specific compound might only be half of what that other person was. So then you're able to make those doses escalations through this repetitious blood work that you're getting every 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks. And that's really, really important in the long term, being able to assess dose escalation for each and every individual, because there will be individuals you work with that have very similar responses, but no one individual is going to have the same response to the same dosage of something as somebody else. And it's very important that you make those assessments over time. And realistically, the less you can put on this person and their total physiology, the easier it is going to be for you to coach. The more you load them with different things, the more there is you have to worry about. It's like a really good way of kind of breaking that down is you have this perfectly well-running car that you've bought off car sales, and it's a lovely, nice Subaru that's stock and it drives well and it goes well. you can add this little piece here and there, but it makes the mechanics of that more complicated. It makes it more intricate. It makes the mechanisms of this specific car more challenging, and there's more that can go wrong, and there's more that can become irregular, and there's more specificity that needs to be taken. So the less you have to do, the more easy you make your job, and the more easy it is to actually assess what it is each and everything is doing, whether it's nutrition, whether it's training, whether it's pharmacology, whether it's PEDs. And then again, like I was saying, with regards to just non-androgenic compounds like you've got clenbuterol with regards to clenbuterol being a beta 2 androgenic agonist. It can obviously increase metabolic rate and lipolysis, especially in females with regards to like mTOR phosphorylation can really help preserve lean mass. So that's not even an androgenic compound in of itself. You've got metformin, which you can implement, and to break it down and put it in the most simplistic nature, like metformin can help and will help your body utilize carbs more efficiently. So less obviously gets stored as adipose. The best way to kind of think of that would be like a little bit of like a carbohydrate traffic cop, keeping your blood sugar from spiking. And these are all, again, these are non-androgenic PEDs. You can, some people don't even associate them to be PEDs. They're more so ancillaries on the outside of those things. But you then got telmisartan, obviously, which is like an angiotensin receptor blocker. So angiotensin is going to build up within the blood, as you escalate mass, as you escalate your hormonal status with regards to, free testosterone. And with majority of my athletes, bar some very specific context and nuance, would use that in a prophylactic, preventative nature for nearly everybody, right? You want to put these things in place to make sure that nothing is going to go wrong. And if it does, you have these things in place where you can counteract that. You want to, with a lot of the preventative measures, you want to make sure that these are things you are doing proactively and preemptively rather than reactively. It's much easier to assess something going wrong as it's going wrong than to correct something once it already has gone wrong or irregular. You've got like injectable L-carnitine, obviously can enhance fatty acid transport into the mitochondria for oxidization. So really important with regards to, again, a non-androgenic compound that both men and women can use. And these are all things that athletes and you should be explaining to your athletes that are natural, that you can leverage before you even need to engage in anabolic androgenic steroids. And you're realistically, like, if you have someone who comes to you guys and says, I want to do testosterone and anandate. I want to do Anavar. I'm a female. I'm competing in bikini in 26, 46 weeks time, whatever it may be. And you tell them, look, understand that you've sought me out, have confidence in your ability to deliver these things, and tell them that they can engage in this progression that they're trying to achieve without even utilizing these things that they're so heavily invested in. Then when they do see that progression as a result, your ability as a coach and how they value that is only going to be elevated that much more, because you completely reframe their thought association to PEDs. And that's really important. Again, you're putting yourself in a position to be more morally and ethically safe, and also giving yourself less specificity and nuance to worry about, especially if you are still a coach who is on your journey. Because again, we all want to be tested with regards to like the capacity of the work in which we can do, and make sure that we have the availability to test ourselves and challenge ourselves. But when you are working within the space of PEDs, it can become really challenging to still have that, desire to work at that next step and next ability, but also understanding that you can literally impact someone's life in a significant way if you get things wrong. And nobody has the intention to do things wrong. People have the intention, bad coaches have the intention to do things easy. And that's where it comes from. It's much easier to do none of this. It's much easier to say, yep, I agree with you. Let's put you on 250 milligrams of testosterone, because more often than not, they will progress. But is that what is best for them? And is that what is best for you in the long term? So understanding, those models and behaviors, and how you can, realistically best implement that for your athlete is really important. So we're getting a little bit over time. I apologize, but realistically, we need to do this again, Cam. We need more time. But the last thing I would say is realistically, around, everything we've spoken about today is reputation. So the reputation and the organic community that you can create. Now, it's extremely challenging to go out and just create this community like that. It takes years and years of time of bringing on board athletes. The way I've always tried to imagine my coaching, and it comes from me working within, team sports, and I've been lucky enough to be in leadership positions both at school and through those team sports, has kind of given me that experience. But if you can imagine whether it's a netball team or a basketball team or a sporting team, if you can imagine all of the athletes in which you coach in the same environment, in the same room, would all of those people coexist in a way that is, respectful and, ethical and, positive, or would it be a lot of toxic egos and different things? And again, it's hard when you're, initially trying to work with a bunch of different people because you want to onboard and you want to take on as many people as you can to give yourself that experience. But if you can almost just give yourself a little bit of a pause and understand that the quality of the individual, the quality of the community, the quality of the team that you bring on is just as important as the quantity in the long term. Like one thing I was having a conversation with regards to a coach the other day, again, just on like the solo consultations, is we all have this association to more immediately, right? So if you work with 10 athletes for 10 weeks, that's obviously not a very long time versus you work with one athlete for 100 weeks. So 10 athletes for 10 weeks, 100 weeks. One athlete for 100 weeks, that is going to create so much more business and benefit and word of mouth and ability for you to represent results and progression and give you the capacity to continue to work as a coach as accumulating all of that for a very short period of time. So allowing and putting in systems that will organically create community, whether it's a Facebook group, whether it's an Instagram group, whether it's being communicative with your clients, whether it's setting up, certain events or, seminars or things where they can come together and create that community. Because the more something feels like a team, the more something feels like a community, even psychologically, the more people will buy in and the more, chance they are of staying because they are now associated themselves with this team, with this person, with an environment, with this community. And that's where, that comes through really high level coaching, but it also comes through organic community creation. And, there are certain things that you can do to stimulate that organic community, but again, it comes through bringing on board the right people, having a really positive reputation over years and years and years, and just being your genuine, authentic self. So realistically, be the coach that you guys wish you had at one point, or either the coach that you needed now. And if you can do that, then you will make your name synonymous with integrity, intelligence, impact, and fulfillment. And the rest of it will take care of itself. It's very nuanced. It's very challenging at times, but if you truly engage in just trying to be obsessed with being obsessed with knowledge and passion and care, I guarantee you guys it'll all take care of itself. So I have never spoken so much for so long, so I'm going to take a break. But I think Cam has a bit to say, but hopefully you guys took something away from that. I wish that we had a little bit more time. I've got a few calls that I've got to run onto as well. So I'll try to stick around for whatever Cam's got to say. But if any of you guys, regardless of if it's with regards to coaching or anything personally, feel free to reach out. Just flick me a message on Instagram or whatnot, and I'd be more than happy to help. And I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to jump on and listen to someone who you may not have ever heard of before talk about coaching. And yeah, the imposter syndrome is peaking, that's for sure.